So may I invite Professor Alka Batra to take the session. Ma'am, please.
Can you hear me? A very good afternoon to all of you. It's a challenge for the audience and for the speaker to give the last talk in a session. I'm thankful to those who are still sitting, and I can tell another thing for sure, that it will not exceed time, not because I'm hesitating to give responses to questions, because I have to leave for my flight, which I tried to book the last one today at 8. So pardon me if we can't, but I'll be here for next 45 minutes for sure. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me opportunity to be here and to listen to all the good speakers for the last 2 days. It was really a good experience. My topic is prevention and detection in anti-doping from research to practice. When Dr. Utsav, he contacted me and I asked about what you want me to speak on anti-doping, he said, don't give much of the details about the lab. Talk about prevention and detection, and that too, not much into the intricacies of the lab work. So I tried to collate few of the things, because the 35 years working in the field has given enough of the material, so I tried to integrate it and give you a glimpse of various things which would be of interest for everyone here. That's what I feel. I'm thankful to my organizations, both the founder, I was the founder member of NDTL when it started, and after serving there for 26 plus years, I retired in 2016 and was invited to Anti-Doping Lab Qatar, where I worked for 8 years. So it was a really pleasure working in both the labs and learning throughout the life and disseminating that information to all of you. These are the topics what I'll be covering: introduction, evolution of prohibited list. Don't get scared with too many things what would be discussed. I can assure you, I can skip and be brief, seeing the expressions of the audience. Doping which started from ancient time. There is a use of drugs in sports when there was no list was existing, but there is evidence about the use of drugs. The first list came into existence in 1967 by the International Olympic Commission, and the dope testing began in 1968. Since then, there is continuous evolution in the doping strategies used by the athlete to improve performance and by the researchers to improve testing methods. As said by Dr. Dennis, it's a Tom and Jerry games, and one is just trying who is better. This is the anti-doping rule violation, which you have seen in the previous presentation, so I will not go into it. I would just like to tell that the definition of doping as given by IOC Medical Commission was use of any substance or method to improve performance is doping. When WADA came into force, it got more elaborated, more expanded, that association with a person who is doping is also banned, refusing to get tests, not giving whereabout information, having possession of drug, everything comes into the doping violation, and sanctions are the same, which is governed by these standards, international standards, which are 8. So that means the harmonization amongst the entire system is through these international standards. There are 30 WADA accredited labs. There are many questions in the audience why testing cannot be done, why there is monopoly of NADA or WADA or NDTL. Of course, the lab usually doesn't come much into the picture. It's WADA and NADA we talk about, we hear about. So these are the labs across the world which are accredited for doing dope testing. How the list, there are evolutions in the list. The list, which is one of the international standard prohibited list, it's tricky to understand this list. So this was a figure which was shown in one of the presentation by WADA Science Director Olivier Rabin, that it's a key to understand this list, and it was something very interesting. And I asked for his permission to use this slide. Of course, wherever WADA slides are used, it's mentioned there. Going to the evolution, how it happened from IOC Medical Commission to the first Olympic testing, and then the expansion of testing with more and more drugs coming into it, anabolic steroids, diuretics, beta blockers, to the 1990s when there was a need to have the harmonization. I'm talking about the era when it's not really a pride to say that I went for my first training in anti-doping in 1990 to Moscow lab. It was a pride at some time, but now I don't feel that. But I was there for a month, and the basic learning was from there, then it was in China. These are in 90 and 91. So, but why I am referring to it, that there was no harmonization at that time. IOC was responsible, different federations were having different rules. So what you are talking about now, why it can't be done by any other, the situation was like that. It has come to this stage where all the rules for every athlete, whether in India, Europe or US, Canada, the rules are same. The sanctions are same, the guidelines are same to follow. That time we have seen an era when for the shooting federation there are different, athletic federation is following some different guidelines. So we have come from that era to now when there is harmonization. So there was a need to have harmonization. That is how WADA was established. And with the establishment of WADA, same single rule for everyone. And from 1999 to now, WADA has progressed so much to bring this harmonization across the entire world. Then technological advancements have happened. What we were detecting at 10 nanogram, now we are going into 1 nanogram or even much lower. Athlete biological passport, you all are aware how it came into. It started with hematological, steroidal, and now it is endocrinological also. From these technical advancements to now it has come intelligence and innovation. WADA has a different standard for intelligence and innovation. Use of AI is in this. We'll talk about this in the later part. And here comes, we heard so much about genomics, proteomics in the lecture, but that's also coming in anti-doping in the intelligence and innovation part, what he talked about. So from 1967, when we had only 40 to 50 drugs, to now, where we have 500 drugs and their metabolites, which comes to around total more than 600. And the list has got, the concentrations have gone lower. Our forensic students would, and the faculty would understand more how it gets challenging when you have to detect at much lower concentration. So what are the consequences of increase in number and decrease in the concentration at which it should be detected? It contributes to more work for the labs and for the NARDOs for interpreting these results. I would like to give one case study, how from 50 to now so many drugs, when it comes, what goes behind the scene, what research goes into it to bring a drug into the prohibited list. Are you interested to listen that? So there are three criteria for a drug to be in the prohibited list. One, it enhances performance. Two, it is contrary to the spirit of sports. And third is, it is risk for the health of the athlete. If any of the two conditions are met, it goes into the prohibited list and then the decision is final, unless some other research goes into it in the coming years and then it is revisited, which also happened in some of the cases. This cycle goes every year, that a new list comes in January and then the process for the list for the next year starts. There are 3 meetings what help into what happened during this time with the list expert group committee, and then it goes to the health, medical and research committee, and the final list comes in October to the stakeholders like the lab. And lab has to have a method by January for that new list which comes. So this is how this process works. Lot of thought process from all these agencies go into the list to bring it, the change in the format, so where it was and how it is now. It depends on the innovations, what material, if there is some material caught at the custom, it has implications onto the list. Because if it is caught at the customs, if forensic labs are concerned with that, the anti-doping labs are also concerned with that, because that material is coming for someone's use. Is it athlete is also like the other human beings in the, so is it for their use? That also has an impact onto the many new substances come into the list based on these seizures, because they come to the lab for the testing. To the forensic labs in many countries, in Qatar it was that any such material coming would go to their national anti-doping agency, they will get it tested and then it would be released. I don't need to talk about the spirit of the sports, how it is given in the anti-doping code. We all are talking about Olympics and all. So we know what is spirit of the sports. We just need to know doping is fundamentally contrary to the spirit of the sports, and that is how the criteria when we evaluate for the drug to be in the prohibited list is. Just to rush through this, for tramadol, there were 3 projects granted by WADA to see for the performance enhancement effect. Before that, I would like to tell that tramadol was in the monitoring list for many years, from 2012 onwards. Result of these projects showed about that it improves performance. We will not go into what is mentioned, what was seen, it was on cycling and other. Regarding the health factor, it's a strong opioid and it has lot of side effects apart from like the performance enhancement is proved. The common side effects and the side effect which happen in 1 out of 10, that dizziness and all is there, which is risky to the athlete, it is risky to the competitor. So based on these factors, these 3 criteria were evaluated. It improves performance, it is dangerous to the health of the athlete and the fellow athlete, and it is contrary to the spirit of sports. Similarly, it happened for cannabis. Many of you would be knowing it is a recreational drug also. So there were a lot of concerns by the athlete because you can't stop athlete for not having those recreational activities where somebody else is smoking. So the passive smoking also leads to getting caught for this. So then the threshold was increased, but it remained into the list, which will not come with passive smoking. Coming to, so this is how, like when we talk about so many drugs got into it, lot of research goes into that, and then it comes. For sampling techniques, we were doing earlier only urine testing. Urine testing for all the drugs. Blood testing came into force only for athlete biological passport. Before that, it was for homologous blood transfusion. We in NDTL had this method accredited in 2009. Now the dry blood spots are also in use, and for research, hair testing and oral fluids are. Dry blood spot was in research for quite some time. Anyone here is aware dry blood spot being used for screening of newborns? That is what it was in 1960s. It was used for newborn screening for a particular health condition, and in anti-doping, it started just few years back, 5-6 years back, as a research, and now it is one of the tests which is being introduced. The technical document for that has come recently to be starting from 2026. So urine for all the tests, for blood only for those which can't be tested, and some are complementary to the urine. It adds value to the urine test. Dry blood spots, all the drugs can't be tested into it. Then why we are doing? We are doing dry blood spots because it adds more information. When urine test cannot be done during COVID time, many of the samples were collected by those testing agencies who were well equipped with it at that time. Collection of the samples is easy. Athlete can do through video calls. In United States, that is